Hello and welcome back to High Fell. The saga of the TT120 Terrier and becoming Bluetooth operational continues. So I have done a previous video on some issues with the 6-pin decoder, but basically to have Bluetooth control, the only decoder that's going to fit in here is the 6-pin, and the 6-pin needs to have a stay alive. Unfortunately, the Trainomatic Nano at the moment does not charge from the 6-pin decoder, and also the AE one takes longer than it does normally. So there is obviously something different in the way that the 6-pin is set up. On the Hornby's own stay alive works perfectly, but of course we haven't got any space to fit that in. So the AE stay alive is the only option we've got any chance of making fit. What I've done is already remove the PCB that the decoder fits into, so just desoldered those wires. So we've got 4 wires, 2 for the motor, 2 for pickups. And then what I'm going to do is desolder the pins on the decoder. And if you notice, you've got a fairly generous blob of solder on there, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And so it's going to be hardwired. If you're not really comfortable doing that, I'm sure you will be able to find somebody that does electrical repairs not a million miles away. Some model shops do soldering services and loco repairs, not all of them, but you will find somebody, I'm sure, that is capable of doing some fine soldering. And there's in terms of modern electronics, there's a pretty generous amount of space to play with there, and it's not overtly complex. The other thing we need to do is try and get as much space as we can. So where the PCB was is where the controller board for the stay alive is going to sit. Now, unfortunately, the Trainomatic one was absolutely perfect size, just the way it goes, and it is a little bit smaller. The AE one is a little bit bigger. So what we're going to have to do is remove the insulated cover and then file some of the board of the PCB down. It's not a huge amount, it doesn't put up much resistance. I'll show you how you do that. It's just a little bit of draw filing, and that will get that to the width. It's, I think, about 1.2 millimeters we need to get. And the reason being that this needs to fit inside the boiler area, and it's just that bit too wide as is. The other thing we need to do is put a 90-degree bend in these tails that are coming off the capacitors. I think also what we might do is we might look at trimming down the insulation. I'll have a look and see how easy it is to bend and whether that's going to fit in. You do need to replace that insulation though, because effectively what we're going to be doing is popping the stay alives, the capacitors for the stay alive are going to fit in here between these 2 sections on the cab floor. I've removed the little brake wheel off there. That has to go, unfortunately. That's made of metal, so whatever you do, don't leave the 2 legs and the soldered joints, don't leave those exposed, because you will have a problem. If you want to, for a little bit of extra reassurance, you could pop a small piece of black insulation tape along the bottom here as well. Just a comment actually on the A ones, I have said it before, quality's just leapt ahead considerably on these. Much better quality wire being used, and the soldering quality loads better. So these are much more robust, and I say these perform. Does take a bit longer to charge than they do normally in most other applications, in other words off an X18 or an 8-pin. Although I have noticed with capacitors, often they do seem to improve in their charge speed once they've gone through a few cycles. It's almost as though they get a little bit of conditioning in there, which would be reasonable to assume. I'm not that up on the electronics of it all. I'm sure there'll be somebody who knows. But anyway, so that's the plan. The next thing I'm going to be doing is, say, dropping these pins off and soldering it on. I'm going to do that off camera because I do want to be able to see what I'm doing. At the moment, I've got a phone and a microphone in the way, and so I want to make sure I get it all right. Just before I do that, you can go to the HM7000 manual, and I've actually printed it off because I find it a lot easier to read printed paper. Unfortunately, I've been doing a lot of document printing recently. So my printer's starting to get a little bit faded. All of the decoders have got a map, and so you've got where the pins are. You've also got what the pins do. So if you're ever unsure, you can always double check here. So on the 8-pin, you say the 6-pin rather, you've got your first pin, and when the little pins and this little plastic guard, when they're on, there's a paint blob on the number 1 pin. And again, if you're not sure, have a look at the little map that you can that's on the in the manual, and that'll basically reference the side that's got the stay alive plug on corresponds to that edge where number 1 pin is. So once you know where number 1 pin is, you can go through, you know that you want your positive motor feed and your negative feed on 1 and 2 respectively, and then the pickups, it says red and black. Fortunately on this time, Hornby, their manufacturers, have put red and black wires on instead of it all being black, so it makes it easier. It's not really the end of the world if you wire the motors back to front, because you can always change that in the decoder. So red obviously the positive, black the negative, and there we go. So that's the next thing to do, and so hopefully when you see this again, that will be soldered to that. So that's gone on quite nicely. Quite happy with that. If you are doing this, just make sure that your solder doesn't run across, and make sure you don't run into any other components. I tend to favour using a hotter iron, and perhaps some people might originally suggest, but then you have it in contact with the solder and the components for a lot less time. So it stops getting a lot of heat buildup in the rest of the component. The next thing I'm going to do, as always, is test it. So I'll pop this on the layout. I'll plug in the Hornby Stay Alive just for convenience, because I know that'll give a really quick result, and then make sure that that is working and that it's not wrong. Before you ever apply power, if you do something like this, it's worth taking the time just to double check your work. So pin 1, we know that's pin 1. Motor positive to pin 1, motor negative. Trace it back, make sure it is coming out of the motor. It's so easy to confuse wires when they're all close together and you've got multiple ones of the same color. And then track 1, track 2. You can do damage if you get these things incorrectly wired up, so double check before you put any power whatsoever to it, and then you know that you're not going to damage expensive items. Right, to the layout. So with the big Hornby power bank on, we're just going to check that. This is just really to test to make sure those connections are all good. Make sure we've got a good solder joint. There we are. And this is actually on Bluetooth as well, so we know that everything's all working there. It makes such a difference when it's actually. Oh, my battery went on my microphone, so I'm going to do this as a voiceover, which means I'm going to have to remember what I was wittering on at for the pictures. So what we're looking at now is the AE Stay Alive, and I'm showing you one that I've got that's been damaged. That was me. And what components are actually underneath the insulation, because what we're going to have to do is remove that insulation and then file off some of the board material. You can see none of the components are desperately close to the edge. We need just to give it, and we're going to do something called draw filing, so it's a really easy technique, and I'll show you how you do that. First thing obviously got to do is remove the heat shrink from the AE decoder, or the board of the Stay Alive. So with just a light amount of pressure, run down and do it from the edge, because then you're not going to accidentally snag any of the components. Make sure your knife is nice and sharp. Rather than try and do it all in one go, run a couple of passes and then that'll just cut through much nicer. And you want to be careful you don't put a lot of pressure on, so you don't run down the front of the board as it gives way and that you take anything off. Now when this has been heat shrunk, it is a little bit more brittle, which helps tear it off when you come to remove it. Don't pull on the wires because you don't want to pull those off the board. Try and avoid that if possible. You can solder them back on if one comes amiss, but it's always easier to leave all of the soldering on the board as is. If you're ever shortening wires, try and shorten from the other end if you really have to. So a couple of little tweaks with a knife and we should have this off. So that is now clear of it. The Trainomatic control board was just the right size. This one's a little bit bigger. Also, just pointing out, AE have really stepped up the quality on these little stay alives as well. Wire's better quality, the soldering is much better quality. So before, it didn't take much before they fell apart in your hand. So we're having to match the size of the board to the available space. I'm going to use a jewellery file. This is just a plain flat jewellery file, and if you put the file so it's flat on the surface, just hold it. You don't need to use much pressure at all, and you're just going to draw it down, so you're taking it from the handle towards the tip of the file, and that will be sufficient just to take off a little bit of material. It's just on that edge there. Now I have to guess what on earth it was I was doing next. It's probably measuring. Here we go, measuring. An engineer's favourite tool is a measuring device. So you can measure the width of the loco just on that piece of the body. It's easier to measure this actually on the thicker part of the vernier caliper jaws. So these, off the top of my head, are around about 8mm, or just under. And what we need to do is getting it closer to about 6.8, so it's about 1.2mm to come off. So holding it just firmly, not hard because you don't want to squash anything, and I said from the handle to the, from the tip to the handle, I want to be doing it the right way. A couple of draws down, and to get an idea, if you've never done it before, after you've just drawn it down a couple of times, measure it, and then it'll give you an idea how much material is coming off each time. You don't need to go crazy with it, but you do need to have a little bit of clearance so that it'll fit up in that area within the boiler smoke box area. So I think it's a good idea to try and do it balanced, so you do it off either side. Generally with PCBs you'll find that there's a uniform amount of material beyond any components, so if you're trying to sneak that extra little millimetre or so, it's really only 0.5 mil each side. And so I think it's 1.2mm we need to get off this particular board, so you're talking 0.6mm, and it really is very, very easy to do. By doing draw filing, keeping the file flat, and this method means that you can get a nice straight edge. Often when I've seen people try and do filing, it's about as straight as my dog's tail. It's challenging for some people. It is a skill. Right, measure again. Now you don't need a whole load of fancy equipment. I have it, but it's not absolutely necessary. I always say that the digital calipers aren't that accurate, and they're not really, but there we are. You can just offer it up and check to see how much you need to do. There we are. So, having made sure it fits, I've also put some Captain tape on, just to wrap that round. Again, even though the smoke box and boiler area on this loco is plastic, it's just a great security feature just to put some Captain tape around, so you've not got any chance. If you fold it around from one side so you cover, and then you can use a pair of scissors just to get a nice straight edge down that side, because you don't want too much excess material because it has to fit up in here. So with the Captain tape on, I've checked to make sure that I've still got it being able to fit in there nice and easily. Now we need to turn our attention to the caps. Now the insulation here, this heat shrink is too big. I've tried getting that in and it's really bulky. And at first you might think you have some space, but even when these are folded, you'll suddenly realise the little bit of space that you look at either side of the firebox door there. Problem is, when you bring the chassis to, get that in shot, that little section there, like the inside of the splashers, fits up in that, and that's part of what locates the body to the footplate. So what we're going to have to do is remove this and also angle the leg of the capacitors. Now this heat shrink isn't actually shrunk on, not been heat treated, so that will pull away. Usually if you haven't bent it already, it's a lot easier. I'd already bent this, so it made it a little bit more difficult. Yours will be new, so you can just pull that away. So effectively what I've done is pulled it away, desoldered, and then resoldered the wires. Do pay attention to where the negative and the positive on each cap is and the wire. So that's a little bit we've taken away. So you can see there's no insulation on there at all at the moment, but we will be adding some back. I've used a little bit of larger heat shrink to hold the two caps together, and that just disguises them so they're not bright blue, and it saves painting. I haven't bothered putting any heat treatment on, that was enough, and so soldered those back together. And then what we'll actually do is add something here, which we're going to use some black tack. Black tack is a really useful insulation because it's soldered. Those joints there are solid, so they're not going anywhere. They're not going to flap about and move, so the wires aren't going to accidentally touch each other as a loco's running along. They're pretty sort of stiff and fixed. So that's going to be the floor side, and we're going to pop, say, some material down as well on the floor, and so that will be nicely insulated. Those wires will go through the firebox, and then that's just long enough for the control board to sit where the PCB was previously. And then obviously the plug just plugs into the decoder. It's definitely challenging trying to put words to a video. I usually sort of chat as I'm doing it. So there we've got the foot plate, and you can see I've popped a little bit of insulation tape, just cut a little strip, put it down there, and that's just really that extra little bit of insurance to make sure that there's no chance of getting a short circuit or anything from the caps. Obviously found a lot to talk about on that. There's not really a lot. So that's fairly easy. And then keeping the wires out of the way, you can see I've got the wires there for the flickering firebox. Now there was another little bit of detail, and it was that little gold piece there, and that sits on the actually onto the foot plate, and I had to remove that. And then the foot plate with the stay alive, with the caps in place in the side of the cab, that just pushed up nice and neatly, nothing holding it back. Just remember to put the wires through the center hole of the foot plate, including any other ones that you might have on. And then what we're going to do is use another little bit of black tack to hold the control board up into the smokebox space. I think when you see it in there, yes, you can see, you could probably actually get a couple of figures and cut them down and stick them to the side once you've got it, if you wanted to disguise it, although it's such a small area you can't really see it. So we're going to get that control board up into the top. There are two screws to fit, so there's one at the front end in the center and at the rear. And here we are. So Terrier with HM 7000 6-pin decoder and an AE Stay Alive all fitted in. No cutting to the body. Had to lose a couple of those little plastic details out in the cab, and that all works fine. Now you might think I've cheated a bit because I've now just shown you it done. I think it's actually easier to show you how it all goes together in reverse. So what I'll do is I've shown you it running, and then I'll just slide the body off, and then you can see how you just squeeze it all in. It's a very tight fit. A little bit of black tack to secure the decoder just over the top of the motor, because it's sitting slightly different position, but it all squeezes in, and then just very gently do up the body screws. So there's those three, there's the two either side of the coal bunker, and then that long one that goes up at the front. You can see we'll just bring this down to a stop, so you can see it's definitely that. There we go, and then change direction, and away we are. So that's full Bluetooth control on the Terrier in TT120. And the next bit of the trick is to see how we can attach some sound to it. At the moment, I'm not going to faff on with the firebox. I did a little test before doing the wiring, and to be honest with you, you can't see it. So I know the Digitrains ones has it. They're running much smaller caps because they're not able to try and do it with the Bluetooth thing. So, oh, they've won again, but I don't mind. They're a brilliant outfit. There we go. So the next thing to do is just to show you how it all squeezes together. As with all these things, just got to be really super careful with it. And there we go, sitting nicely. And it's just like revealing how a magic trick was done. So I've undone the screws, and if I pull this apart, you'll see the decoder sits on top of the CAN motor. It's just got a small amount of black tack just to hold it in place. It's got a little bit of movement which helps when you push it together, so you can give it a bit of a wiggle. The wire on the AE decoder is perfect length, so that you don't really need to trim that down at all. The control board is up at the front. The decoder does sit very snugly towards the back. It really kind of almost takes up as much space as there is. When you come to put the two bits and pieces together, particularly the first time, just make sure you get the wires tucked in. Once they've been in place a couple of times, then it almost starts to take up a shape, and you should be able to just push that in. You've got those 3 screw holes in there. So there's 2 towards the back underneath the coal bunker, and then the longer one at the front, and that all pushes down. Providing you've taken those a couple of little bits and pieces of detail out of the cab, it should all push together quite nicely. The next thing to do would be to see if we can get some sound to work with this loco as well. That would be interesting. Where on earth are we going to put that? Well, that's the next thing to work on. But for now, this is wrapped up. So we have HM 7000 6-pin decoder working on the app, nice and reliable because it's got a stay alive with it. Thank you very much for watching. It's a great little loco. I think it is loads of fun. Hopefully Hornby will get a bit of a fix sorted. It might even be down to firmware. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. They'll work that one out. But this is a way of making sure you can get your loco working on Bluetooth, which I think a lot of people really looking forward to. It's not particularly difficult, but it is a bit fiddly, and I'm sure with a bit of practice and taking your time, it is still achievable for most modelers. As always, thank you very much for watching and all the lovely comments, and look forward to seeing you on the next videos. There's a few more to come. Stay safe and happy modelling.